Now to another story here in Chicago. 300 former patients of a gynecologist say they were abused and violated, and two top Chicago hospitals did nothing to protect them. Startling allegations coming out in a lawsuit filed in Cook County this morning. The suit takes aim at Endeavor Health, which now operates North Shore Medical Group and Swedish Covenant Hospital. NBC5 investigates PJ Randhawa walks us through some of these allegations. PJ.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack here. Dr. Fabio Ortega, the gynecologist in this case, already pleaded guilty to sexually abusing two patients in 2021. But attorneys allege that was just the tip of the iceberg. And Swedish and North Shore Hospital helped cover up dozens of abuse allegations against him for decades. On Monday, one of Ortega's longtime patients spoke with us exclusively about why she filed this lawsuit. This mother of two, identified only as Jane Doe, first saw Dr. Ortega in the early 90s when she was 18 and pregnant. She had never seen a gynecologist before, and she didn't speak English. She said Ortega would ask her inappropriate questions about her sex life. Eventually, he began asking her about masturbation while examining her, and she decided to stop seeing him. Other patients also reported unnecessary vaginal and breast examinations. Jane Doe's attorney says Ortega had a documented history of sexual abuse and predatory behavior against female patients that started in the early 90s, yet both North Shore and Swedish allegedly ignored and concealed that abuse.
Women reported. They reported again and again and again. And each time, they were not only met with disbelief by Swedish and North Shore, they were told to question their very experiences as women.
You don't think when you're gonna go to doctor, you're gonna have something, you're gonna be raped, or you're gonna be, touched inappropriate.
We reached out to Endeavor Health, which now owns Swedish and North Shore. In a comment, they told us, "We have focused on reviewing individual claims and are committed to engaging in a process that allows for meaningful review and response to each person impacted. Due to pending legal matters and patient privacy, we are unable to comment on any specific case or allegations."
Pretty disturbing allegations there, definitely.
Yes, and more lawsuits to be filed according to the attorneys.
All right, PJ Randhawa, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Parker Steiner, S-T-I-N-A-R. The first rule of medicine is to do no harm. And that rule applies to medical practitioners as well as medical institutions. And this morning you'll hear how that rule was violated in the most terrifying and horrific way in our community. You'll hear how the greatest betrayal of trust between patient and medical care provider is when a patient is abused under the guise of medical care and treatment. And it's an even greater betrayal of trust when a patient is sexually abused under the guise of medical care and treatment, and the medical facility that they turn to for care and treatment knew of and enabled the sexual predator. In a few moments, my partner Simone will share details about the horrific negligence and failures of powerful Chicago medical institutions to put patient safety first. But before we begin, I want to remind everyone that sexual abuse under the guise of medical treatment can happen to anyone and everywhere, including in our community. Sexual abuse under the guise of medical care and treatment can happen to anyone, regardless of age, race, gender, or social economic class, and it happened here in our community. Unless powerful medical institutions are held accountable for employing, harboring, and enabling sexual predators, this will continue to happen again, again, and again. This morning, Steiner, Gould, Greco, and Hensley filed a lawsuit against Swedish Covenant Hospital and North Shore University Health System, now Endeavor Health, for knowingly employing, harboring, and enabling a sexual predator who sexually abused hundreds of patients. This is the ultimate failure of the first rule of medicine, to do no harm. And as you'll hear shortly from Simone, Swedish and North Shore enabled the sexual predator to abuse hundreds of women for numerous decades. If this happened in our community, it can happen here again and across the country unless Swedish and North Shore are held accountable. Billion-dollar institutions like Swedish and North Shore have a duty to protect patients that look to them for care and treatment. Instead, they place profits over patient safety. Despite more than 2 decades of warning sign after warning sign, complaint after complaint, they continue to employ and enable an OBGYN sexual predator who had unfettered access to female patients. Swedish and North Shore promoted themselves in the Chicago medical community as premier medical facilities that provided top-notch patient care. Patients believed that Swedish and North Shore adequately performed background checks on their employees, performed performance reviews that monitored patient care and treatment, and most importantly, took patient complaints, especially those surrounding sexual abuse and sexual misconduct, seriously. Patients believed that not only would Swedish and North Shore provide them appropriate medical care, that they would also shield them against sexual abuse under the guise of medical treatment. Fabio Ortega is a sexual predator who preyed on patients that had very little prior gynecological examinations and care. Many of his patients were Spanish-speaking, minors, children, pregnant, immigrants, or Medicare patients. He knew that these patients would trust his white coat, but more importantly, that these patients placed their trust in Swedish and North Shore to protect them and provide them appropriate medical care.
Good morning. My name is Simone Shinton. I am not just one of the lawyers for these incredible and brave women, I am also a survivor of sexual abuse myself. Over the past few months, I have had the honor of speaking with these women, and each of them will tell you that they didn't come forward for themselves. They came forward to make sure that this can never happen to another woman again. Now, the harm that Dr. Ortega inflicted upon these women is appalling and it's indisputable. But that's not what I'm here to share with you today. Because this is not just a story about a criminally perverse doctor. This is a story about a healthcare system that cared more about profiting off of that doctor's abuse than protecting its patients. What I want to talk about with you today is what these medical institutions were aware of when they decided year after year, decade after decade, to continue to allow Dr. Ortega to have unsupervised access to these vulnerable patients. Because the allegations in this lawsuit, though they're news to all of us, they're not news to these medical institutions. Somehow, miraculous women continued to report year after year that they were experiencing discomfort when Dr. Ortega closed the doors to his examination room. Women reported that Dr. Ortega asked them sexually invasive questions. Women reported that Dr. Ortega performed what felt like an unnecessary vaginal or breast examination, or an unnecessarily long examination. Women reported that Ortega's examinations felt more sexual than medical, but they didn't have the medical expertise to know one way or the other. Women reported. They reported again and again and again. And each time, they were not only met with disbelief by Swedish and North Shore, they were told to question their very experiences as women. They were told that the very abuse that they complained of was medically necessary and normal. Beginning in the early 1990s, Swedish began receiving complaints about Dr. Ortega from female patients. We know of at least 4 women who were brave enough to report during the decade and a half that Ortega practiced there. The first known patient reported in about 1993. 3 more brave women would come forward in the next 4 years. 2 of those female patients were children. One was a 17-year-old pregnant girl. The other was a 14-year-old pregnant girl. Their experiences were dismissed by Swedish and not properly documented. And there were other red flags, like an ever-growing list of women who just happened to request a female physician after the first appointment that they had with Ortega. One of these brave women went far enough to even report Dr. Ortega's abuse to the Chicago Police Department in 2004. Now, at this time, Ortega conveniently took a year leave of absence, and nobody asked any questions about it. Soon after, he began practicing at North Shore. And the story should have ended here. It could have ended here. Instead, because neither Swedish nor North Shore were willing to do their duty to protect these women, Ortega's campaign of sexual abuse began anew. We know of 21 women who in some way, shape, or form complained about the experience they were having with Ortega at North Shore. The first woman came forward in 2006 when she asked a North Shore representative, "How do I file a complaint about what just happened to me?" A representative suggested that she'd take care of it. He would go on to practice for over a decade. Another patient reported in 2008. Another patient reported in 2009. Another patient reported in 2010. North Shore tells these women, "What you're experiencing is normal." In 2012, a North Shore employee reported to her supervisor that Ortega wasn't just making female patients feel uncomfortable, he was also making the nursing staff feel uncomfortable. That same year, 3 more patients complain about Dr. Ortega. North Shore quietly holds a meeting with Ortega about the complaint and continues to allow him to have unsupervised access to women for another 4 to 5 years. 2 more patients report in 2013. One even reports to the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation. In 2015, 4 more women report. In 2016, 5 more women report. One of these women is told by North Shore that her complaint would be the first against Ortega. In February 2017, a brave survivor reported Ortega to the Skokie police. And that forthcoming investigation would ultimately lead to him losing his medical license and serving prison time. But in the time that criminal investigation was ongoing, North Shore still allowed Dr. Ortega to have unsupervised access to female patients. And in that time, we know of at least 6 more women who become victims. And this is just what we know about. One of our clients found herself in Dr. Ortega's office in 2016 because she required a rape kit. She had just been raped, and she was able to muster the strength to go seek medical treatment. North Shore provided her with Dr. Ortega. In that appointment, Dr. Ortega would conduct a vaginal examination where he attempted to sexually stimulate her with ungloved fingers. He would conduct a breast examination where he fondled her for no medical purpose. And this miracle of a woman still managed to walk outside of that medical examination room and ask the front desk, "Was what just happened to me medically necessary? I don't understand why I needed a breast examination." And North Shore told her, "That's how he is. It's normal. It's a part of his treatment plan." Betrayal just isn't a strong enough word to capture what North Shore did to these women. Today, Swedish and North Shore must finally listen to the voices of the women that they have silenced for decades. These healthcare institutions did not just turn a blind eye to the abuse that was happening in front of them. They enabled a sexual predator. They gave him a platform, and they gaslit the women who continued to come forward and report what was going on there. The women that he preyed upon were very often young women, Latina women, and pregnant women. We are here today because it is time for change. It is time for accountability. It's time to listen to women and believe these survivors. No longer will we allow healthcare institutions to turn a blind eye to sexual abuse under the guise of medical treatment, something that at least 1 in 20 women experience. No longer will survivors' voices be silenced by the institutions who are charged with protecting them. We demand that North Shore and Swedish implement comprehensive reforms across the Endeavor network to ensure that abuse of this magnitude never happens again. But reform alone is not enough. These institutions must also face the financial consequences of their negligence to send the clear message that this will not be tolerated by any institution in any community, anywhere. Parker.
We're here this morning to fight for survivors of abuse, to fight for anyone that's been sexually abused under the guise of medical treatment, to hold institutions that knowingly enable sexual predators to prey on vulnerable patients accountable, to prevent this from continuing to happen in our community and across the country. Throughout my career, I've been fortunate to represent hundreds of individuals who have been sexually abused under the guise of medical care and treatment. And sadly, what's commonly seen is that minority patients are silenced by healthcare providers when they raise concerns or issue complaints. That healthcare providers silence females, Latino patients, young patients, immigrants, Medicare patients. That medical institutions fail to listen and protect those individuals. And sadly, we've seen in our civil justice system, those same healthcare institutions attempt to discount those minorities through civil litigation and accountability. That due to an individual's race, immigration status, or gender, that healthcare institutions attempt to civilly discount their damages. They ignored them when they issued complaints, and they attempt to ignore them through civil litigation. Our message to the brave survivors of Dr. Ortega, our message to the public, and our message to Swedish and North Shore: no discounts. These survivors deserve North Shore and Swedish accept accountability and are civilly accountable for decades of neglect. We've seen other medical facilities across the country who failed to protect patient safety, that failed to act when they knew about sexual predators, be held civilly accountable. The standard has been set, and sadly, there's a standard. In 2021, USC was forced to pay $852 million to 710 women who were sexually abused by an OBGYN. In 2022, Columbia University was forced to pay $165 million to 147 women who were sexually abused by an OBGYN under the guise of medical treatment. Swedish and North Shore, too, will be forced to compensate these survivors accordingly. No discounts. To the survivors, we hear you, we believe you. Your voices will no longer be silenced, and we will fight for you. Together, we will hold Swedish and North Shore accountable and ensure that sexual abuse under the guise of medical treatment no longer happens in our community, that patients can feel safe seeking medical care and treatment, and that powerful billion-dollar medical institutions are held accountable and provide appropriate patient care moving forward. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Hey, Maggie Vesco from NBC News. Can you talk to us about how you were able to make contact with a lot of these patients, just given how intimidating it would be to speak out about this and how intimidating it's been to speak out about this?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we focus on is access to justice for individuals, especially those that are abused under the guise of medical treatment. They never know that they're sexually abused. Unless, in this case, someone was a board-certified OBGYN, they wouldn't know of it was necessary for them to receive a vaginal exam during an appointment, or a breast exam, or numerous vaginal exams during one appointment. And unfortunately, many of these survivors go on questioning, was that normal? Why me? What happened? And because as a society, we have concerns about our own personal health. And if a doctor recommends a certain type of care, we tend to follow that suggestion. We want to ensure that we're safe and healthy. So many of these survivors obviously never know they were ever abused. So when we discover events like took place at Swedish and North Shore, we feel civilly obligated to inform patients, to spread awareness. And we're fortunate at our firm to have decades of experience with representing survivors and holding medical institutions accountable. So we do as much public awareness as possible. So those individuals that are sitting around at home that for years have questioned, why me? What happened? Was that normal? Know that we have Ortega, who pled guilty to criminal sexual assault.
And then just a follow-up on that. Did the hospitals ever reach out to patients, especially after he pleaded guilty to abusing 2 of them, to let them know that this had happened and ask if they had been victimized?
They didn't, and instead they continued to cover up and conceal Ortega's conduct. In fact, we have clients that after his criminal investigation were told, oh, he's just not here, or he retired. They continued to lie and cover up Ortega's sexual abuse, criminal investigation, removal of his license, suspension, and everything. Yes?
Hi, this is Emily Horner with the Chicago Tribune. When can we expect, I know you said you were like 300 of his former patients have retained you all. When can we expect more lawsuits being filed? And are there any, like, are you guys expecting some of these to, you know, settle before lawsuits are filed? And what's the status?
At this point, our goal is to hold Swedish North Shore and any employee that knew of and enabled this conduct accountable. And that oftentimes requires civil litigation, discovery, depositions, ultimately a trial.
Okay, and is there, like, are you expecting more civil suits to be filed in the following weeks?
Yes.
Or, okay, any, like, sense of how many, or? No?
That's a strategic legal decision that we're appreciating at this time. Any other questions? Well, thank you for being here, covering this story, helping us spread awareness, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.